EPA is a more stringent testing method, and we needed to step back and do a better job of explaining all this. This was always just a delay. The information on the dashboard did not change from Tuesday when it first came up. The news release information did not really change. The original release was 100% accurate, but we did rework it and we tried to provide more information to provide better understanding of what we're presenting. And I do want to apologize for the anxiety and concern that this communications mistake may have caused members of the general public, especially people directly impacted by the Red Hill crisis. And quite frankly, I want to apologize to the task force as well. This it was a rough week for all of us as we tried to make sure that we got it right. But I do believe that it was important for us to get it right. And of course, I can answer questions on that if you like. But let's get to the University of Hawaii Red Hill Task Force and the dashboard that was released today. And for reporters who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll start to call upon you. All right, seeing there's no questions, thank you for joining us today. And who wants to go first? Okay, we'll start with Mahealani.
I guess who is the leader of the group, and if the leader of the group can just tell us what your most significant findings were, especially in dealing with these particular neighborhoods like Hickam, Ford Island, and the Red Hill Malka area, especially after the health department removed its advisory.
As the leader of this group, I guess that question falls initially to me. Thank you for that question. We do provide a pretty detailed answer to that question in our on the dashboard under the FAQs. But I will give Craig Nelson a chance to articulate that for all of you right now. Craig?
Yeah, so the main thing that we expound on in the dashboard is we've had a lot of positive screening detections on in areas that have supply from the Red Hill Shaft from the Navy water and not from Board of Water Supply areas. Relative to the timing of the lift of the DOH, I don't know the exact time that lift was done. Maybe somebody else on the team does. Sean or Catherine, do either of you know? We have had detects.
It was in March,
okay.
March 18th, 2022.
Great, yeah. So we have had detects relatively recently. Again, these are screening detections, but and they've only occurred on the areas with Navy water.
Okay, let's go to our next question. Jen from KHON.
Can someone just briefly go over how this process works and what some of those results are? I know it is on the dashboard, but if somebody can just give a brief explanation of what you guys found.
I'm going to defer as well to Craig again.
Yeah, so we've been collecting samples, first community provided, and since February, we've been collecting them ourselves using a standard operating procedure. We use a fluorescence screening tool, which allows us to see particular signatures that are spectral signatures of fluorescent compounds in water. Some of the compounds in jet fuel are fluorescent, and they have specific spectral signatures that look distinct from other compounds. So this tool, we can work fast. We can analyze samples much quicker than using the more strict and rigid and regulatory actionable testing methods that Department of Health and other agencies have been using, along with the Navy and Board of Water Supply. And so we've been screening community tap water samples, again, using our own collections since February. And when we find something that looks like it may be a jet fuel derived fluorescence compound, which we can usually distinguish from other fluorescence compounds in water, but not always. Then we notify the private owner or residents, and we are working with Department of Health to track down those and do more extensive testing. Does that answer your question, Jen?
Yes, it does. I'm not sure. Can I ask a follow-up question or should we move on?
We'll come back to you, Jen, I promise.
Okay, no problem.
All right, next up is Sophie from the Star Advertiser.
Yeah, thank you. There's been criticism from the Department of Health, and as well, saying that this process can be rife with errors and produce false positives. I was hoping that you could respond to that concern. And also, given that you've sort of created this public dashboard, and it doesn't sound like it's only limited to the Navy's water system. Rather, it's also including the Board of Water Supply. The question of that is, why not just leave that up to the Board of Water Supply, which does really elaborate and extensive testing and is, really focused on accuracy? I mean, are you concerned that, putting, these positives up there could alarm people and scare them that their water isn't safe when there's really not enough information there to sort of tell whether it could be a false positive or there's no quantitative analysis of that sample?
I can start off with a bit of the answer to that question. First of all, we are certainly aware of all the other testing going on by the Board of Water Supply, Department of Health, and the Navy. Those tests are done for the most part using EPA certified methods. The water samples have to be sent to the mainland to do that, and the turnaround time is weeks. And it's quite expensive. So one of the motivations for doing this additional kind of analysis, which is a screening, not a quantitative testing, is to be able to get answers more quickly and to be able to do more samples in a given amount of time. So I'm going to again pass it to Greg to follow up and provide more details in response to your question. Greg?
Yeah, Sophie, I think the main detail there is the difference between screening and testing. So screening definitely has the potential to find things that end up not being a problem. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
But could you address the issue of whether, for instance, the data that was put up on Tuesday, there were all these positives in the Navy water system. It created quite a panic to the point that, a law firm was calling for the Navy to evacuate people. So if people go on this dashboard and they see, in Kaimo Kea, there's these positives, are you concerned that, that can cause undue panic?
I'll defer to Sean and Catherine about whether there are positives in Kaimo Kea. I believe we've been pretty clear that the positives have only occurred on taps that are serviced by the Red Hill Navy lines.
No, that was just a hypothetical. I wasn't saying there had been positive. I'm saying that if you're doing the sampling and you're putting it online and people are seeing positives in certain areas, I'm just wondering if you could respond to that issue of whether it could create undue panic.
So, I just want to jump in and just say that I think that's why this press conference and the news release is so important, because it clearly explains, well, we try at least to the best of our ability to clearly explain that this is a screening, what this screening process is, and it's just to make people more aware of the water that's coming out of their tap. It's not just screening for possible fuel. It's if you look at the dashboard. So we're hoping it's a tool, and it's definitely, and I shouldn't speak for the team, but there's definitely, we're not trying to create any kind of extra concern or panic. It's about providing knowledge, providing information.
If
I don't
I
know, Tom,
could,
is that accurate?
Don, go ahead.
if I could jump in here for a second, I want to make it really clear that this is not something that we woke up in the morning and decided that we were going to go out and look for this. This was in response to requests of residents and people who are worried. we know that there's the possibility. We've also been in discussion with DOH about exactly how this process is going and how we can best interface with them. We see this as sort of a way to give more information and context that people can use and DOH can use. It's informational and it's educational and it's research focused, and that's basically what we've been doing, is responding to the requests of people living in different places on Navy water and also not on Navy water. And it's been really, for example, beneficial to say a daycare that's on Board of Water Supply water, just to know that their water's fine, even though it should be, but in fact it is.
I would just echo that. Yeah, this is, I think, a project about method development. And all of our conversations with DOH, I think they've been very excited about us developing a new method that can help them augment their own testing. It's not a replacement for DOH testing. It's just another tool that could be used, and DOH is just being very transparent as we develop this tool, and we're releasing the data as we generate it, and we're trying to explain as best as we can what it does.
And I also think, Sophie, you bring up a good point that everyone should remember. The Board of Water Supply is regularly testing its water, and they're very thorough. And then even currently, the Navy is testing the water that's been impacted monthly. 5% of the homes, schools, daycare centers, and the DOH is verifying those results. So this is just another layer of testing that's going to, hopefully provide, again, clear transparency into the quality of water that here on the island of Oahu. Let's go to our next question. And then, of course, Sophie, if you have a follow-up, please raise your hand. And Jen, you still have your hand up. I think you had a follow-up question. Why don't you go ahead?
I know you're saying that these results are informational, educational, and that there does need to be follow-up testing. But I mean, should residents that are living in the areas or the households where tests did come out positive for these fluorescents, the chemicals that caused it, I mean, should they be concerned?
Yes, I think they should be concerned. They should be interested in getting follow-up tests for their water. Getting EPA certified test results that indicate exactly what is in their water. But yes, it's a screening tool that identifies a possible problem. And I think the affected community members should be concerned.
Let's see. Mehalani from Hawaii News Now.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to know from the team, maybe Don or Tom, in doing the screenings and your research, do you feel that you've been able to do this without undue influence from the Navy and Department of Health? And do you feel that you truly have academic freedom when you're trying to get funding from Department of Defense?
Unequivocally, yes. We are maintaining independence. That's mandatory for us. We cannot give up our academic independence, academic freedom. And so regardless of, the source of funding, which has been brought up, or any suggestions from the parties involved, we have to maintain our independence. Without that, that's the most valuable thing we have. And it's valuable not only to us, but also to all the other parties involved who, rely on our independence and our, reliability. And so, yeah, I think we can say without any question that we're maintaining our independence.
Can you address, there's been enormous pressure, a lot of behind the scenes conflict amongst community members and the task force, interagencies. Can you address how you've personally been handling this controversy and the pressure in regards to such sensitive information?
Actually, there hasn't been much controversy and conflict on our end. We have, we try to maintain communications with all elements of the, of this problem, all the different parties. And we even kind of take the role of trying to facilitate that communication. So I think we've done a pretty good job of that, and we've maintained good relationships with all the parties. I don't think there's anything that I would call confrontational involved in our communications with the other parties.
All right. Thanks, Mehalani. Let's go. I guess we lost. Let's go to Sophie. Back to Sophie for Star Advertiser.
Yeah, thank you. The press release said that the positives were indicative that the contaminants were JP5, but I'm not clear on how you can identify it as specifically JP5, because you can't identify the specific chemical, right? Can someone explain that? Like, how do you know it's not JP8 or gasoline or diesel or?
Greg?
We don't. So the press release doesn't say that when we get a positive detection on our screening that it's JP5. It says that we can infer based on the spectral characteristics that it might be JP5, and that's why we screen it. And so it requires further testing. But we can't differentiate exactly whether we have only JP5 in the sample. We can only say that it looks like it and we should pursue it further.
Does that answer your question, Sophie?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Other questions?
Yeah, sorry, could you just clarify that? So a positive means it looks like JP5?
So by looks, I mean spectrally, the characteristics of the sample are consistent with JP5. We can measure JP5 and it has a very consistent spectral properties. When we measure a tap water and we see spectral characteristics that look very different from that, we would not flag it as a positive to detect. If we see spectral characteristics that look like JP5, they have a certain shape and a certain intensity, then we flag it as a potential positive screen. Does that answer your question, Mahalani?
All right. I think Wyatt now had a question. Wyatt, you got to unmute, Wyatt.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so could someone talk about, there seems to be kind of a disconnect between the people living in these homes that would get these positive screenings and the Navy or the Department of Health. The response I got from the Navy today was there's no contamination, nothing is shown as contamination, and there hasn't been any since March 15th or 18th. So is this all just left up to individual renters in these military homes to navigate their way on this? Or can someone just talk about that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I could say it again that, this project was about developing a new method, and to develop a new method, you need to have some data to look at. And so this is preliminary data developing that method, and we're just sharing it with everyone out of transparency. But I think this is actually not the end of the project. It's really just the beginning, where we're now going to talk to DOH and Navy and make sure that we have a system in place so that our data can go into their decision-making process. But first, we had to get to that point by showing them what we were doing, how it worked, and what we were seeing.
And just to follow up, I don't know if Craig can pick this up or Sean, but just because there's a trace amount detected doesn't mean it's above the amount that the Department of Health uses to determine whether something is considered contaminated. Can one of you explain that how those two things might contradict but can actually coexist? Just because you pick up a sample doesn't mean it's above that level.
We're measuring two different things. So, and correct, just because we get a positive detect on our screening does not mean that there is jet fuel in the water for sure. But Wyatt, what you're really asking is, are the residents left to their own devices? And I don't think we can really answer that question. Our goal, as Sean pointed out, is to do the research and be transparent in how we're doing the research and to make the data public, and to make it easily digestible and visual. One of the main things that the goal of this project is to make it accessible, not just technically, like a spreadsheet, but also visually, maps and graphs and other ways for the public to interact with the results that we have.
Thank
you. Back to Jen from KHON. Jen?
Thank you. I just want a little bit more clarification on the results and whether, you're finding JP5. Now you're saying that it looks like JP5, but how many other chemicals, I'm not a scientist, so I really don't know, how many other chemicals could produce this result? Is it like a handful, or is it 1,000 other chemicals that this could potentially give you the same result that's similar to what you guys are seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen, and a very reasonable one. I can't answer the question of how many other chemicals can give signatures like JP5. Certainly more than a handful. But there are an uncountable number of organic compounds in the world, in the universe. And I guess the best analogy is if you find something with a screen, how likely is, like if you had a fever, how likely is it that you have COVID? It's a hard question to answer. I think when you're downstream of an area that may have had a jet fuel spill of a compound that has that particular fluorescence signature, then that changes the equation.
Would you say any of the chemicals that would produce this type of signature would be dangerous to someone's health?
I can't speak to that. Maybe others on the team can, but in general, we are not epidemiologists or toxicologists. And so that's not really our area of expertise.
Thanks, Jen. Sophie, you have your hand up? Sophie from Star Advertiser.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go back to this issue of false positives because DOH has raised that a couple of times when I was talking to them. Can you say, what percentage of these tests do produce false positives? And as far as the positives that are in the portal, can you say if any of those are false positives? Do you know?
I guess I'll field this one. The short answer is we don't know, and we would need to validate them with an EPA certified method.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, do you think you should put that on the website? I mean, I'm just, I don't think there's anything on the portal. Oh, it does say that. Okay.
Yeah, very clearly.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Sophie. Mehalani from Hawaii News Now.
Members of the task force were sharing the data with the residents as data came in, and they were doing it basically resident to resident amongst certain community members. But at any time, did you feel that there was the need to share this data sooner as these results were coming in, especially if someone might look at it from, let's say, the Hickam neighborhood and see a positive?
So yeah, there's been some questions about, whether we should have released information instantly. And I'd say I'm going to refer that question to Sean about why we're releasing now. First of all, it took us some time to develop this tool and to provide all the important information to go with it. But in general, we've tried to get the information out as quickly as we can. But Sean, if you would follow up on that.
Yeah, and I think this actually speaks to some of your other questions as well, because we're kind of caught between, wanting to share as much information as we have and are generating, and the desire to validate our methods before we do that. And we're kind of caught in between, right? We really want to be honest and supportive of the residents who are concerned, because that's the people that we're trying to help. We're trying to establish some baseline of what their water quality was, whether that data will be reinterpreted later, at least we have that record. We want to release that. And then we also want to validate this method and work with DOH to make sure it's an integrated part of like an actual response. And that's the part we're still working on. So yeah, if it seems kind of awkward, it's because we're still working on this method and we're still developing this as a collaborative effort to, I think, really help the residents.
And, you know, sort of in addition to this method development piece, there's also, you know, as sort of trying to figure out what the data means in the context of, say, a neighborhood scale, not just this particular, what was in this particular sample, but what does it look like at a neighborhood scale when we take, you know, X number of samples in a neighborhood on a given day, and a few of them screen positive, right? Well, how do you scale that out to a neighborhood? How do you responsibly share that at a neighborhood scale when you're not sure how that applies to a neighborhood? So that's also been a big part of this, trying to figure out what these results mean in context. And so that's been also a big part of sort of our discussions internally and also with other stakeholders.
And I'll just say one more time too, I mean, this started as a response to specific residents' concerns, and we tried to address that. Obviously, we're all scientists, and you know, we know how to design a study that could cover an entire city, but that's not what we did here. This was purely method development and trying to respond to individual concerns. I think moving forward is really hoping that it grows into that, especially in collaboration with DOH, so that it can be an early detection system with, you know, false positives and false negatives, but it's better than having no information on those households.
Sophie from the Star Advertiser.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of, you know, the press release indicated that you're now seeking more funding from the Department of Defense. What exactly do you envision with this portal? Can you talk about like whether you're trying to make it statewide, and I mean, what do you see as the future for this? And also, could you talk a little bit more and sort of relation to that to collection methods, and what is that standard protocol? Is it something that residents can do at home, or do you need, how do you make sure that it doesn't get contaminated or whatnot?
Yeah, I'll answer the beginning part of that question, and if I forget to do so, refer the collection part of your question to Don in a moment. So the portal is the most visible part of a much larger effort and a much even larger planned effort. We are developing something that we're calling the Pacific Water Security and Resilience Program. And we're seeking federal funding for that, large-scale federal funding. It's motivated by the Red Hill crisis, but it will have a scope that goes well beyond Red Hill. So it will encompass other DoD facilities, for example, in Hawaii and other parts of the US-affiliated Pacific Islands, but other water crises as well, or potential crises related to contamination from other sources, related to water shortage being caused by and anticipated to be caused by climate change, for example, and species invasion in our forests and so forth. And so we're developing a comprehensive program that addresses this and many, many other problems. We are seeking that funding through DoD sources. People ask, why should we allow the Navy to pay for our research? And we feel like, you know, they're the responsible party. They should be paying for the costs of responding to this crisis. So I'm going to turn it over to Don to answer the question about collection.
So early on, we were accepting samples from residents, and you know, in whatever we asked for them to be in clean vessels that had never had food in them. But I think, you know, but that was very early on when we were still sort of trying to dial in on our methodology, and we eventually settled on having trained scientists or trained people supervised by scientists who were familiar with water sampling go to people's homes and take samples following an SOP, following a standardized sample collecting method, using a particular type of glass vial. And so, we're not, and so that's the model going forward, is that we're going to make sure that trained people are going out, taking these samples, bringing them back. So that's basically how we've been doing sampling.
Just add one more thing in response to your question, Sophie, is that, everyone's referring to this relatively small group here as the task force. Actually, the UH Red Hill Task Force numbers about 80 people. And so we have people working on all sorts of issues related to this problem and developing new research and outreach activities to address this problem.
I'll also just add that our SOP is available on the dashboard FAQ if you want to refer back to it.
Sophie, you still have another question?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to something that Tom said in regards to the findings, which was that he did think that people should be concerned about those findings. I was hoping you could, because that's really sort of one of the big issues in all of this. Could you expand on that? I mean, how concerned do you think people should be? Do you think it's like, I mean, because, frankly, I think people see this and say, I don't know if I want to drink my water. Do you think that's a reasonable reaction to the data you guys have found?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable reaction. I think it's incumbent on people who have had a positive detect in their tap water to follow up and get further testing. And in the meantime, it's probably prudent to not drink the water. But I'd like to turn this over to Craig again for his take on, how concerned people should be.
Yeah, there are a variety of ways that fluorescence writ large and specific fluorescent characteristics that look like JP5, as I've said before, can show up in tap pipes. But the vast majority of the samples we've collected are negative. They're blank. They have nothing in them. So when we get a positive detect, absolutely, if I had it in my house, I would be pushing for a proper test, and I would not drink the water until then.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, but it's not just the individuals that have positive detects that this is alarmed. So if you see, in the dashboard that there are like 4 positive detects in, Red Hill community, do you think that concern should spread throughout the whole community?
That's a really good question, and I think that's an important point to clarify. So there are potential sources that are not system-wide. And so we really want to emphasize that a positive detect should translate to a test. It should not create alarm about a specific community, but it is interesting. And that's why we put the data out there, is because, if 5 of your neighbors also have a positive detect, you'll have to use your judgment about what to do there. But it's definitely a meaningful observation.
I'm sorry, I hate to jump in, but I just want to clarify that, because I don't think the dots say exactly where those homes are. I could be wrong. But I mean, so, if I see 4 dots in my neighborhood, I can see, someone being concerned about that. So, I mean, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand what that message is, because you're saying, oh, if you see a bunch of your neighbors with positives, you would be concerned, but are you going to know, exactly where those positives are?
Don?
Well, I would say, Sophie, that anecdotally speaking to residents, people are concerned, and were concerned before we released these data, and have been concerned since the spill was made public. I speak to people who are not showering in the water, and were not showering in the water, before any member of our team came to their house. So I think, in a way, our results could actually allay to some degree people's concern if there are 12 dots in your neighborhood and 1 or 2 of them are positive. that might give somebody a feeling that, okay, so there is something going on, but it's not fully in all of our water all of the time. And so many people I've talked to have spoken about having a sense, about having a little more peace of mind, knowing that there are several different groups looking at the water. And so I think that's really, really valuable as well.
Vicky, did you have a question? We noticed you unmuted.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. No, actually,
Vicky is the Star Advertiser editorial board.
Actually, while you're doing that, if I could jump back in, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up to Sophie's question regarding the fact that the dots are sort of specific to a neighborhood and not to a location. That's done to protect people's privacy. And so we are not, and we will not share addresses with, we will not, and we do not share addresses. And so the reason that those dots are neighborhood locations instead of in individual houses is so that people's privacy is protected.
But does the task force notify those residents of the results directly? So the residents are informed?
Yes. So when there's a positive screen, the person whose house had the positive screening event is notified as soon as possible.
Okay. Sophie, did you have another question? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sophie, you're muted.
You're still muted, Sophie. We cannot hear you.
Sorry about that. I apologize if you guys already answered this, but is that, you already did samples from Board of Water Supply. Is the plan to expand that, for instance, throughout Oahu? And if so, have you had discussions with the Board of Water Supply about that, and what was their reaction?
Anybody on the team want to take that?
I think so far we've just been conversing with residents who raise concerns. We haven't been coordinating this sampling through the Navy or the Board of Water Supply. So any samples that we did on Board of Water Supply water were, residents contacted us and said, hey, can you look at our water? And I think that also goes to the point about this question about regional detections. Again, as scientists, if we had a real strong question about, is this region have contamination, we would design a whole study around that. That's not what we did here. And I think we shouldn't pretend that's what we did. We just responded to resident concerns. So it's really difficult to, say anything about a neighborhood just because, we really didn't design the study to test neighborhood level questions. We're just trying to share data.
And so we are 45 minutes in. I think it's probably time for the last question, unless there are a lot of questions waiting. Does anybody else have any more questions? I don't know, Tom, if you had anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just add a little bit to what Sean said and say that as we develop this as a research project and as a program, it's definitely possible that we would, begin a research project like the one Sean described for Red Hill and maybe for other places. So right now we're not doing it, but yeah, it's very possible that we will. And I just want to thank all the members of the media for attending and asking great questions, and yeah, we're happy to follow up with other information as needed.
And the press conference itself, we also recorded it, members of the media, if you need anything, and we'll be posting it as well. Again, if you have any more questions, also please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll get with the task force. Sophie, I know I have a couple of questions that you sent earlier that I'll make sure we get the answers to before your deadline today. And members of the task force, if you could just please stay, I promise it won't take long, another 3 or 4 minutes. And then again, members of the media and whoever else may have joined us, thank you so much again for your time, and again, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out, email news@hawaii.edu. And I know that just about every one of you have my cell phone number. So don't hesitate to call. Thank you so much, everybody.